Vinyl Souk. Very happy to introduce Mr. Brewster.
Hello.
Bill is an author, a journalist, DJ extraordinaire, record collector, and an all-round very nice guy. Welcome to the courtyard, to the outdoor weather that we finally can enjoy in Dubai after our fun summer. I did look up your Wikipedia profile, by the way.
It's quite underwhelming and not 100% accurate.
Okay. So,
it's nothing to do with me, basically.
Yeah, okay. So anyone out there wants to update that, feel free. So that's the way it works. There was a quote that I found online from Jockey Slide. We need to edit that out. What Bill Brewster doesn't know about DJing isn't worth knowing.
I wouldn't quite go that far.
That was someone else. Bill is the co-author with his friend Frank Broughton of an amazing book called Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, which I think came out in 1999.
It did, first, yeah. 20. We've just had a 25th anniversary.
I think that's right, 25 years.
Yeah.
That's not the only thing he's done. He's done many other things, and perhaps he can talk about those. But
some of them are even legal.
But you also launched DJ History, I think the following year or soon after that, right?
Yeah, 2000 we launched it.
Yeah, which is in the annals of time. I didn't even own a computer in 2000, so they were really leading the charge. But I also remember the forum on DJ History as being also like.
It was a bit legendary.
It totally was. Is that not there anymore?
Well, we kind of relaunched it a couple of years ago, but I think Facebook has sort of killed the niche interest forum business.
Yeah.
So anyone wants to know anything about, obscure Italo disco records, they go to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram now, rather than our forum. So I think that the glory days of internet forums are finished.
Shame. Going back 25 years, it would be great to get your story, picture on where you were when that happened, where you were at in your life, and what sort of led to the launch of the book and the process that was taken to create the first version.
Okay, so we had the idea to write a book together, Frank and I, when we met in New York. I just moved to New York in 1994. Frank had been living there since 1990. And he was doing writing for Mix Mag and ID and magazines in the UK. He was like a kind of New York stringer. And we kind of met about a week after I moved there, and we sort of hit it off and started hanging out together, and we were going to the Sound Factory every week, which was Junior Vasquez's club in New York, and we just kept meeting these old guys who had incredible memories of like the disco era and stuff like that, and they would talk about the Loft, the Paradise Garage, 12 West, all of these legendary clubs in New York, and that's sort of where we got the idea from, really, was just talking to old people that had lived through the AIDS epidemic, they'd lived through New York's kind of troubled past, and were still around, and we wanted to capture their stories. So the initial idea we had really was to just write a book about the history of disco that started with Stonewall in 1969 and ended with the AIDS crisis in the early 1980s. And when we got back to the UK, we wrote a book together for the Ministry of Sound called The Manual, and it was kind of a bit of a cash-in book, really, like a Christmas stocking filler. Wasn't a substantial book, but we like working together. We found that we could work together without killing each other. And our publisher really liked what we did and said, have you got any ideas for any books? And so we kind of pitched this disco idea to him. And he said, yeah, that's all right, but why don't you just write about the history of the DJ? And that kind of gave us a much wider scope to work with. And also it sort of turned us into megalomaniacs, really. We thought if we did a really good job on this, we could basically stop anyone else from ever trying to do it. So we spent the next year, it got commissioned in the summer of 1998, and it came out September 99. So we spent a year doing it, but we'd already accumulated a certain amount of interviews just from doing regular monthly pieces for Mixmag and stuff like that. We'd interviewed people like Frankie Knuckles and Derek Carter and kind of other people round and about. But yeah, I mean, we divided it into chapters and then split the chapters up, and we each wrote different chapters and then would come together every Friday to kind of work on the chapters together. So it kind of worked quite well, really, and delivered the book towards the summer of 1999, and it came out in September 99. So yeah, that was it. And also at the time, Fabric was just about to open, and Frank and I have been doing these parties called Low Life, which we started in March 1995 in New York. And one of the people that was opening Fabric, Nikki Smith, she came to one of our parties and loved what I was doing and asked if I wanted to be one of the residents at Fabric. So in the same week the book came out, I started a residency at Fabric as well, so it was a pretty good week. So that was kind of leading up to 1999.
And had anyone tried to document dance music history or DJ history like in such a sort of comprehensive, broad manner to that point?
Well, in the modern era, the only person that had done it, who was the first, was Matthew Collin, who wrote a book called Altered State, which was a really good book, but that was essentially just about Britain and acid house and the Balearic scene and all that kind of stuff.
It's a great book.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book. And we were friends with Matthew, so he gave us quite a lot of advice when we were kind of writing it and stuff like that. Prior to that, there were a few books that came out during the disco era. There was a really good Albert Goldman book about disco that came out in 1979. So there were a few odds and ends, but you really had to dig deep to get any information. There was a sort of a cult culture magazine called Collusion in the UK that had done a kind of oral history of the loft and the early New York scene. But I'd only ever seen photocopies of it. It was one of those magazines that hadn't sold well, but people that had seen it had kept it. And Ashley Beadle gave me a photocopy of it. That's how I knew that it existed. That was in about 1996. I went over to Ashley's house to interview him for Mixmag, I think, and he said, "Have you seen this?" And he gave me a photocopy of this piece from Collusion, which had interviews with David Mancuso, Larry Levan, you know, pretty much all the greats of New York sort of dance music.
Yeah. I feel like the timing of your book and those interviews was paramount to capturing what needed to capture, because obviously there are individuals who passed, sadly, since then. But I think, the timing was sort of perfect. And then I guess the question on the back of that is, what was it like to revisit the book 25 years later? Because there's a lot that's happened, like technology and music-wise and DJ-wise in particular. It's now billions of dollars of an industry, but we're also left without some of these storytellers anymore.
Well, obviously the book came out at a fortuitous time for us, but it wasn't planned that way. That just is how it happened. But it did strike a chord with people, and it sold incredibly well, and it's been translated quite a few times into different languages. We just sold a translation earlier this year for Chinese market. There's a new Japanese edition coming out sometime this year or next year. So it's been translated quite a few times. Yeah, I mean, all of that is just luck, really. I mean, partially the book was good and so people liked it. But I think a lot of that is just really down to luck. You know, when a book comes out, it's never about your planning, it's about whenever it comes out, really. It's very random. So, I mean, over the past 25 years, there's quite a lot happened, but I don't think there's a lot that's changed in terms of history. You know, most of the revolutionary era of dance music was the disco era. If you think about all of the things that DJs do now, mixing, that started during disco era, building sound systems, that started during the disco era, the invention of the 12-inch started during the disco era. Just the whole culture really existed in the disco era, and everything else since then has just been marketing. You know, the music's changed and the technology's changed, and you know, obviously you look at how you deliver music in a nightclub now, and it's so much more complex because you've got CDJs and you've got samplers and effects units and all kinds of things that you can do. But fundamentally, the thing that makes people dance is a really good DJ with really good music, playing it in the right order. That's essentially, that hasn't changed.
Yeah, no,
you know, looking for good music hasn't changed. There's a lot more crap.
Yeah.
But there's also loads of really great records as well. It's just, I would say it's harder to find good music now because there's so much coming out. But fundamentally, I don't really feel like anything has changed in the last 25 years. The most significant movement, probably dubstep, maybe.
Yeah.
And the sort of subsequent, you know, grime and as an offshoot of hip hop, I suppose, has happened in the last 25 years. But I think fundamentally, all the things that we see as essential components of dance music were already in place in 1980.
Yeah, totally. And I guess also the people who are still interested in your book and the updated version of the book are quite probably like interested to know the history, because that's kind of where a lot of the most amazing music was made. Before it was labeled disco, or you know, before there were like 75 house genres, or whatever. Like I feel like I don't know if that's in the update.
Yeah, that's changed.
Yeah, that's changed. How we have to label everything so it can be commercialized, and you know. But I wonder about the scene more broadly, and I think perhaps COVID had an impact on this as well. Is like the smaller sort of DIY, you know, clubs having to shut their doors, but also like this massive commercialization of, you know, we've got parties now with 30,000 kids listening to EDM. I'm just wondering where you see, having sort of regrouped and looked back at the history, which is, you know, where for me it's the most interesting, because you know, like it's DIY, and you know, like there is that kind of, when it comes to parties, it's sort of that punk ethos, that sort of like, you know, like this is anti-establishment, but now it's well within the establishment.
It's an established industry now, isn't it? When we were all kind of learning how to mix records in the late 1980s in the UK, everything was made up as we went along. Even though it was a well-established industry in New York, I'd say in the UK it was really a kind of, everyone was making stuff up, because up until then, DJs only ever played in their local town or city. They didn't travel to another town. And most DJs didn't make their living as a DJ. They were doing something else, whether it was working in a record store or working for a record company, or even just, I don't know, driving a taxi or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's a career, and there are people doing degrees in DJing. So it's kind of changed from a business perspective.
Yeah.
I'd say the one big change, actually, going back to the previous question, is how many female DJs there are now. And we were very conscious of that when we were writing the new edition, that we wanted to find ways of getting more female voices into the story. Even though most of the revolutionaries were men, we thought it'd be good to have many more women's voices in there, just to show that there were women present at some of these events in the past. I find it really inspiring, the amount of women that are coming into dance music now. And I don't know if it's the same everywhere else, but in the UK there's like a huge influx of young women. Like my daughter, for example, is 19, and she's like, I've been teaching her how to DJ, and there are so many. She's just started at University of Newcastle, and there's like a women's DJ club, and so that kind of stuff is changing. But in terms of the industry part of it, the fact that people are going to see EDM, I think, is a good thing, because loads of kids in the 1990s got into dance music through Underworld, Prodigy, Fatboy Slim, who all had an element of rock and roll about what they were doing. And I think EDM is a little bit like that as well. I think, in 10 years, 15 years time, a lot of those kids will be listening to like the Aphex Twin rather than Skrillex.
Yeah. I think that point about how music is consumed and discovered, I think, has changed a lot as well, right? With online and the resurgence of vinyl, and we're at Vinyl Souk, and everyone has a renewed interest in turntables or records. How do you see that as a record collector? And I think I remember you saying once before that you were a record collector before you were a DJ, and I guess record collecting is a bit of, there's a bit of history involved in that as well. So I think it connects well to the narrative about going and speaking to these people, because you're on a musical discovery voyage, whatever you might want to call it. But how do you approach collecting records now? How do you see that having changed more broadly?
Everything I do now stems from record collecting.
Yeah.
Like, being a DJ, I got asked to DJ in the late 1980s because I had a good record collection. Almost everything that I do now has come from collecting records. Now I don't really collect records because I sold my collection. I had 13,000 records, and I sold them to a dealer called Nick the Record in the UK. Sold them about 5 years ago. I still look for music. I still occasionally even buy vinyl albums. I think there's something amazing about record collecting, and also troubling. I think it's one half music enthusiast, one half kind of mental disorder. And I confess to being someone that was very guilty of the mental disorder side of it. I couldn't walk past any shop that might have records in it without going and having a look, and I'd have like 5 copies of some records just because I thought, well, if I see someone that doesn't have it, I can give it to them. So I think music discovery is one of the most exciting things about being a DJ, and it's probably the most important thing as well. DJs that are working full-time as a DJ during the week that's what they should be doing. They should be digging for music that they don't already know, whether that's brand new music that's just coming out, or like ancient records that were released in Ethiopia in the 1970s. Yeah. That's the joy of what record collecting and DJing is all about, I think. And that curating of music is key to you and your personality as a DJ, I think. And you have to work harder to do that now, because you go on Spotify and there's like, the range of music on there is incredible. Yeah. So, you've got to, can you find things that Shazam doesn't know about? Can you find things that aren't on Spotify? Those are the 2 big questions for young DJs now. Don't play stuff that everyone knows from Spotify. Play something that we don't know. That's what you're looking for as a DJ, is to discover stuff that other people don't know about. That's what interests me.
Yeah, likewise. But I feel like now that 1 in 5 households has a DJ, I'm not sure if everyone gets that message, and I think it would be great, and maybe they will eventually, and they'll discover it through some dusty bins in a Goodwill or thrift shop somewhere. But I would have thought that you probably get sent like hundreds of tracks of music. Your podcast has been running for, I think, 700, 800 episodes.
Yeah, I started it in 2008, I think, or 2009. November 2009.
Yeah, and how do you feel about that now? Are you still excited to share music? People should help you with your music discovery process?
That's the thing that I live for.
Yeah.
Is like finding incredible music and playing it for people, whether it's on my podcast or whether it's on, I've got like a monthly radio show on NTS, obviously DJing as well in clubs. I love, when I was a 14-year-old, I used to make tapes and give them to my mates and girlfriends, and so I think I always had that DJ bug inside me of wanting to find music and then wanting to introduce it to people. So, and I still feel that kind of burning inside me now. I love finding new things and playing them for people.
And as far as like being online, do you miss being in a record store or like digging in the dust or like?
I think there was a golden era of dance music record stores from about 89 through to about 95, 96, where every Friday or every Saturday you'd be in a record store in the UK or in New York as well, because I lived there for a while, where there were crowds of people in there, and the new records would come in, and you know, Joe Clausel, for example, used to work at Tracks in Dance Tracks, sorry, in on 3rd Street, and on a Friday everyone would come in and he'd be DJing with all of these new records, and people were like, yeah, I want one of those. And I loved that period, it was amazing, but that period is gone and it isn't ever going to come back. So I do miss that communality of loads of DJs being together looking for the same kind of things or looking for interesting music to play. But you can dig online now without ever going to a record store and still find amazing records that are unShazamable. So the nature of digging has completely changed now.
Yeah.
I think, you know, serious diggers probably, you need to go to some godforsaken country somewhere like Vanuatu or Papua New Guinea.
Australia.
Or Australia. And basically just go and look for tapes in back streets and stuff like that. I mean, the first time I went to Africa, they only sold tapes where I went, but you could buy all of these tapes on the street corners of like King Sunny Ade albums that had never made it outside of Nigeria and stuff like that. So there's still a lot of music to be discovered. A lot of previously unreleased music as well. You talk to almost anyone that was recording in the 70s and 80s, they've also got unreleased tracks that, you know, mixes that didn't make it at the time. So it's like, the amount of music still to be discovered is endless.
I think that's one of the things most from the last 10, 15 years in particular, the amount of reissues of records that you've never heard of before. Someone's gone to visit the family to find the master tapes, you know, from an original pressing or a tape or whatever it is, and then repress that up. I think we're kind of in a very blessed timing, and I don't feel like I feel like it's endless, you know, what they're going to find next, or, you know, you're going to have access to. It's changed a lot.
There's an album that was made by a group called J. Walter Negro and the Loose Joints, who put out one single, Shoot the Pump, in 1981 on John Hammond's Zoo York label. They also went on to record an album. A couple of the tracks have leaked online, so there's like two tracks on YouTube. I know this album exists, and I've been trying to find the masters for it for the last 10 years. So yeah, and I'm sure there's countless more examples of that kind of thing. You know, that a band released a single, made an album, and then the album didn't come out because they were dropped before the album was released. There's a lot of examples of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that the search for interesting new music is pretty endless, really.
Yeah, totally. I think that Andrew Morgan from EPP, like there was a lot of, you know, when technology changed in the early 80s, mid 80s, where everyone could have a drum machine and a synth and record at home. There must be like hundreds or thousands of these, gems. So that's exciting. As far as your own music, you mentioned before that you've not been in the studio for a while, but would you mind giving a bit of a background on how you got started into music or playing music or in the scene?
Okay, so I joined a post-punk band at the end of 1981 called Group Therapy, and we got a record deal with a label in London called Camera, who also released 2 full albums. They released Palle Schoenberg's album. Palle Schoenberg eventually became Maurizio from, the kind of techno DJ from Germany. Who else was on that label? Mark Armand, Allez, like a Belgian post-punk group. And we released 1 single, which came out in March 1983, and then we recorded a follow-up, and that never came out. Yet another example of music that was made that was never released. That never got released. And then after that, I didn't go in a studio again until 1993, and then I started working a little bit in DMC studio, doing like a couple of remixes here and there with a guy called James Wiltshire, who went on to kind of be quite successful as an engineer and a producer. Lovely man. And then since then I've sort of dabbled here and there. I made quite a lot of music with a guy called Alex Tepper, who was in Future Shock. And weirdly, actually, I bumped into him in the airport in Stansted yesterday as I was going to get the flight to come out here. And then more recently, I've been working with Raj Gupta, aka Rayman, me and him. The last remix I did with Raj was for Krang Bin, a track from their last album. So I'm much more of a dilettante when it comes to the studio. It's not my bread and butter. I love going in and faffing around and making music, but it's not my area of expertise. I would say I'm more committed to DJing than producing.
And on that, where are you DJing? You seem to be very busy, outside of the podcasts and writing books, and we can maybe touch on your new project in a minute, but I feel like you're traveling a lot, you're doing, I guess we're on the back end of the festival season. What have been some of the highlights recently?
I've played quite a lot of festivals over the summer. Probably my two favourite festivals are probably Love International in Croatia, just because Croatia is such a lovely place and it's just nice to be there. Weirdly, this year I didn't get booked. I've been booked every year prior to that, but I'd already bought a couple of cheap flights out to Croatia for that weekend. So me and my partner went out there anyway and just were chilling out we just kind of got an Airbnb and hung out by the beach and stuffed ourselves with fish for 5 days. The other festival that I really love is Houghton, which is in Norfolk, which is in the kind of east side of the UK. That's fantastic as well. Apart from that, I've travelled quite a bit this year. I've been to Ibiza twice. Where else have I been? Berlin. Like quite a lot of places abroad, basically. I can't think offhand which ones, but yeah, I'm trying. When you live in Europe, it's just so easy to get to different countries. In that, a 2-hour flight, you can pretty much travel to about 50 different territories. So there are a lot of options, basically.
Amazing. When it comes to DJing, though, do you think your sets have changed much, or your outlook has changed if you listen back to 10, 20 years ago? What do you think? Can you listen to those? Or have you moved on completely from those tracks that you were playing back then?
I think there's a consistency in the kind of records that I play. So I'm still playing things that were new records in 1992, 1993. I did go through a period in the kind of late 90s and early 90s of playing super deep house. When I was playing at Fabric, I was playing really deep records, most of which wouldn't work on most other dance floors. They wouldn't even work on most other dance floors then. There was something about the sound system and fabric that allowed you to get away with that. I'd say I've sort of slightly changed what I do now because I just find that the world is so shit at the moment that you want to do something more uplifting for people, like make it a bit more of a joyous occasion. So I've kind of been playing a lot more vocal tracks and a lot more kind of uplifting things, at the risk of sounding like a head candy DJ. But just, I feel like people want to come away with something positive from an evening. So I go into every gig that I do trying to bring joy and happiness to people's lives because, let's face it, we live in a world with Donald Trump. So look, we need something good on a Saturday night or a Friday night to just let us forget that Donald Trump is alive for 2 hours.
Yeah, he's on a long list, so yeah, absolutely. I like that. Speaking of upcoming projects, what's next? I know you mentioned before that you had something that was cooking. It was very interesting. Would you like to tell us about that?
Okay, so for the last 2 years I've been writing a book about the history of Italian dance music. So a DJ in Berlin called Valentina Bodino approached me a couple of years ago and someone had recommended me to her. And she said, do you want to get involved in helping me put this book together? So we've been working on that together for the last 2 years. We're nearly at the end. I'm desperately trying to finish it by Christmas, but I've actually been sat in my room this afternoon working on it before we did this interview. Yeah, that's been a really fun project because I don't speak Italian. I thought I knew quite a lot about Italian music, but obviously when you dig in that deep, you realise that you don't know very much at all. And even now, I still feel like I'm scratching the surface of what Italy has got to offer. But it's got an incredible music history, a really strong musical past. And when you think about the influence of Neapolitan music, which is really one of the bases of popular music in America, you know, you've got Cuba on one side and gospel on the other side, and then the influence of Italian Americans bringing Neapolitan sounds over to America. It's one of the foundation stones of like American music. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, learning about this country and all of the eccentricities of the country and its people, and I'm excited to, and also I will be very relieved when I've actually finished it. Writing a book is like having a baby. You know, after you go through that again, with apologies to women, because obviously I've never actually produced a baby, but
your own type of baby.
Yeah, I mean, I do have 2 children, but obviously I give birth to them. But it is kind of a bit like that. You go through the trauma of giving birth to a child, and that's what putting a book together is like. It's a bit like, this is never going to end, but eventually it does somehow.
And your career in journalism, like, did that help with obviously it helped with the book and getting pieces of the puzzle together as far as interviews and project managing, but you're putting together all of these singular pieces into like a much broader project.
Yeah.
What did you learn from having to do that? And now you've done it 5 times, 4 or 5 times.
I've written 5 books already, so this is the 6th.
Yeah.
So, well, the way to approach it, I suppose it's the same as maybe recording an album, is you kind of break it down into constituent parts and make a chapter plan and then work on it that way, so that you're building small pieces here and there, and then you gradually start putting it all together so that the book actually works and flows between the different chapters. But I often leap around from one chapter to another depending on where I am with a particular chapter, or because I've spoken to somebody different and I've got new information. So it's sort of, yeah, having a separate chapter plan is pretty crucial, really. I mean, I don't have any formal qualifications as a writer or as a journalist. I don't have a degree. I didn't go to the sixth form. I was originally a chef. So I spent the first 12 years of my working life working in places like this. So yeah, I've learned through experience what to do, really.
Yeah.
Pretty much almost everything that I've done in my life has been bullshitted my way in there, and then somehow sort of never been exposed.
I think that's the same case for everybody, to be honest, whether they admit it or not. But when you're you're writing a book on history, on culture, and you're relying on, you mentioned before there were like 80 to 90 interviews plus for this new book. Do you need to map out like the journey or the like your understanding of history first, or do you need to pull out what you learned from all those interviews then to build the story?
Yeah, you do. And actually, because I've interviewed so many people in the past, when I'm writing something, what's really good about doing hundreds and hundreds of interviewing and then painfully transcribing them is that they really stick in your head. So when you're in the middle of writing something, you think, well, actually, I seem to remember that so-and-so mentioned something about that subject, and then you go and have a look in your little archive, and sure enough, there's like a little paragraph quote from someone about being in Rimini in 1991, and you're like, oh, this is perfect for what I need.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it does rely on having quite a good memory of all of the work you've done before. I think when you go through those interviews over and over again, because I've got probably about like more than 400 interviews that I've done now, loads of which have never been published. I think you just build up a mental database of information in your head that helps you kind of finesse the subject and put a plan together of how you're going to approach it. Sometimes that doesn't come to you though until you're actually writing, and you're like, actually, I know what this chapter needs. It needs this or it needs that.
Imagine your house, you have all of these bits of post-its and papers stuck up on the wall with string, mixing it together. Because there's a lot, right? Like there's a lot to like organise from that.
It's loads. And actually, I'll tell you what I use a lot is that, you know, the notes you get on an Apple Mac. I've got loads of those notes. Loads of them with like links on them and notes about this, that and the other. Things that come to you when you sat on the train going into London or something, and you're like writing on your iPhone because you've just thought of something.
Love it.
So yeah, it's very much a kind of... the thing about books is they live in your head and they won't go away while you're doing them, so you're constantly thinking about different things, and therefore you often have ideas. Like I was on the plane yesterday, I was making notes on my iPhone, just things that I'd remembered, just so I don't forget them.
Yeah, but do you revisit the book once it's out? Like, is it like an album where you don't want to revisit it because you're going to like, oh, I really should have done this or that?
Once it's been proofread and printed and everything, to me, it's something from the past. I like when we did the new edition of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. I hadn't looked at it since the last proper edition we did was in 2006. I hadn't looked at that book since then, so it was like reading a new book, really. And when we were going to add stuff to it, I kind of spent 6 weeks reading it and making notes and going through it, just seeing what we could change, what we could make better, what we could edit, so it's interesting going back to it. You kind of remember doing it, but it feels a little bit new to you as well.
So basically wait 25 years or so, then it'll feel fresh. Like
yeah, exactly.
Like it.
I mean, it's a bit like a lot of people I know, when they've made a record or they've made an album, they're like, I used to know Pete Heller from Farley & Heller quite well, and he was so sick of the remixes that he did. When he finished them, he'd give them to me and say, can you play this and tell me if it's crap or not? Yeah. Because you stop having an opinion. When you've listened to them, you know this, you work in the studio, when you hear things over and over again, you reach a certain point where your opinion is muddled by the amount of times you've listened to something, so you can't work out whether what you've just done has improved it or made it worse.
So
And I think that writing books is a very, very similar process where you fiddle around with it so much that you could reach a point where you never stop. And
yeah, exactly.
I kind of like the Arthur Russell approach of first thought, best thought, and get done quickly. Everything I've done in the studio that took a small amount of time has been the most successful and best things that I've ever done. All the ones that I spent days fiddling over are the ones that are just not very good. And I didn't have the common sense to just think, this idea is terrible, let's do something else.
But now you've committed time to it, so like, we might as well just commit more time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I heard someone say the other day, it's like, you can never hear your album or your track for the first time. Like,
yeah.
And like, all you can get is like feedback you get from others. But yeah, it's still sort of in the ether, right? It's not.
Yeah.
So you
Exactly.
don't lose that. What was I going to ask? Do you have any questions or you would like me to? Oh, what I was going to ask is about the new book, the revised book, the updated book, which you have copies of, and they're around here somewhere. Beautiful.
Or if you're a vegan, it's quite vegetarian-y. Look at that, it's massive, isn't it? 840 pages,
Wow.
250,000 words.
250,000 words.
250,000 words.
My question was, which I forgot briefly, was, did you go back and edit the original version?
Yes.
Were there things in it you already knew that you wanted to change, or was it just
no? But I realised going through it there were bits of it that were a bit flabby and could be made a bit more svelte. Basically, our editor said if you want to write new stuff, you've got to get rid of some old stuff. So I think we edited it. I think we got rid of about 30,000 words and then added about 35,000 words.
Okay.
So we kind of went a little bit over what the limit was, but I spent a long time going through it first before we ever started writing, just saying we could get rid of this, we could get rid of that, and I sent a plan over to Frank, and he was like, yeah, let's do it, and then he wrote a new chapter on women, which had been an amalgamation of other things that had been in the book. And we created a new chapter for jazz funk as well, which had sort of been stuffed in with acid house before. So we kind of changed things around a little bit and just, I think, sharpened it up really and made it relevant for this era, I suppose.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to reading it. This is, if anyone's not read the original version, this version, it really is, it's the best book about the history of DJing, dance music culture that I've come close to. I've read quite a few, and yeah, it's so good, and it's so surprising when you're reading it, the people you're actually talking to, like IRL, you know, like, and it's such a special book. You have copies for sale?
I do, yeah. I basically filled a suitcase full of books.
Okay.
Contraband.
So this is you for the weekend?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I've basically brought a full suitcase with one pair of socks and a load of books.
That's all you need. I could throw to the audience. If anyone has any questions, please shout out. We have a question.
I can't hear you. Come and talk into the microphone.
Are you only famous for Last Night, The DJ's Day in My Life, or are you famous for writing other books and other things?
Oh, I'm incredibly famous on so many levels. Well, I've written some other books. One called How to DJ Properly, which has sold quite a lot of copies as well. I'm just generally famous, really. Just, you know, some people just are.
It takes commitment to be famous, though, clearly, and a lot of books in your suitcase. Before I forget, you mentioned... one more question. While I take the mic...
Hi, Bill. I'm going to keep it quite simple. It's probably quite weighted, but do you have a preferred genre or style that you prefer to DJ rather than being booked to DJ a specific? Because some people will book you and go, right, we want a disco or a house or a whatever, I assume, because of the type of festival or audience or time you slot or whatever. Do you ever go, you know what, I just want to just play what I want? And do you get that affordance as a DJ? And if you would, what genre would you kind of cherry pick from?
I do occasionally get people saying, can you play this kind of music? Can you play that kind of music? I've done over the last couple of years, I've done a couple of Studio 54 parties where I played music from Studio 54. I did 2 Paradise Garage parties because it would have been Larry Levan's 70th birthday. I did 2 Paradise Garage parties this year as well, one in London and one up north. So I do get asked to do those, and actually I quite enjoy those because you sort of have to, you can't just turn up with what you normally play, you have to kind of actually do a bit of research before you do that. But generally I prefer to just be able to turn up and do what I do because I like the freedom to be able to play different styles of music and different eras.
Is it riskier to do a set like you just said, you have to do a Studio 54? Because I'm going to say probably most of the Larry Levan mixers are probably already out there, the Walter Gibbons mixers and stuff, they're already out there. Do you find it hard? Because if you go with a bag full of, I don't know, a USB stick full of 1,000 songs or whatever, you're going to have quite a lot of overlap with the other DJs who are going to be playing for a similar period. Surely, I mean, I know there's a lot of music out there, but DJs tend to favour certain mixers over other mixers, let's say?
Well, both of the Paradise Garage gigs I did one with Kelvin Andrews from Sure As Pure and my partner Frank Broughton. And I was quite surprised by how different it turned out compared to what I was expecting. Because obviously there are a lot of really great Larry Levan remixes, but we didn't really play that many Larry Levan remixes, and everyone seemed to dig quite deep into the playlist of the Paradise Garage and come up with a few sort of surprising records. One of the records that Kelvin played was a level 42 thing that Larry Levan used to play, which I'd never even heard before. So there were definitely things there that I was quite surprised to come across, and I think one party was for 5 hours and the other one for 6 hours, and obviously that gives you a chance to play quite a wide variety of styles and sounds. But both of them work really well.
Have you ever been booked by a booker, a DJ, what do you call them? Some like this man. Have you ever been booked to play a party and go, do they even know what music I play? And you've gone, what the, why Dreamscape or something, like I've
been booked at a few things like that, yeah. I got booked to play at Miss Moneypenny's once, and in Birmingham, which was this kind of glam club with girls with orange makeup on.
Was that the one with the bouncy floor?
I can't remember that. I only lasted an hour before they mercifully threw me off out of the DJ booth. So yeah, you do get. I did a Ukrainian fashion show once in Kiev. And that was a disaster as well. They didn't want me at all. It was just really awful. So yeah, you do occasionally get booked for things that whoever booked must have been mad.
So there's I can see lots of parallels with other types of comedians, for example.
Yes.
Similar parallels there, and what you were saying about journalists and musicians, there's definitely similar parallels there. But that's artistry, right? It's when you stop putting the paint on the canvas, sorry. It's knowing.
I mean, ultimately, it's about who has control over the night, and that's why I started doing my own parties, because I wanted ultimate, as a megalomaniac, I wanted ultimate control over everything to do with the party, because I felt like I had a better sense of what a party should be. So when our parties that we've been doing, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary in February. we always tried to make it like a house party, so it was more informal and a bit more DIY in outlook. So it never looked really glam. It looked like two incompetent people putting on a party.
That sounds very nouveau riche. It was the very kind of how people are doing it nowadays on TikTok and YouTube. They're just organising their own party in the front room and inviting people along and filming it. That sounds like...
Well, I appreciate you must know much more about TikTok than me, but all I know about TikTok is when my children show me something that is really not funny and are both laughing out loudly about it. That lady over there wants to.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for your time and for informing us. It's been good. I just wanted to ask, how has your audience changed over time since when you first started? I know he mentioned a few different parties and you trying to control the party crowd, but that's kind of impossible. And how did that change your approach to DJing throughout the years? Because I'm a big participant in the DJ world as a dancer.
Right.
And so for me, music is really important. And so it's just about, I won't go out if it's a bad party.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I've found really interesting is that people are really the same all over the world. And they like a lot of the same things, but they don't necessarily know it. So I've never been to a country where I couldn't play the way that I play. Because I think you have to sort of, the thing about DJing is you're trying to bring people into your world for 2 hours, 3 hours or whatever. And so you cut them a bit of slack and give them maybe a few things that you know that they'll like. And then gradually you go over to the stuff that you like a little bit more until you build up their trust. Essentially what you're doing is trying to build up the trust of the dance floor for the first 45 minutes or whatever. And then once you feel like you've got that trust, it's like a partnership, the dance floor and the DJ, much more so than like a rock concert, which is about consuming something. To me, that's what makes DJing interesting, is that you're part of a partnership with the dance floor for the night. And so you're completely beholden to how the dance floor reacts to what you do, how much information they can give you back from the way that they're reacting to the music that you're playing. Whereas you go to a pop concert or a rock concert and you're basically stood there consuming it, you're not really participating in it. And that's the challenge of DJing, is that you need the dance floor. Without the dance floor, you're nothing. They're the people that keep you in business. So, but I've found people all around the world are really amazingly similar in terms of what they want and how they feel music.
That's amazing. And the second question, I heard you slip that you used to be a chef.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, is that something that you're still...
I love cooking at home, but
dabbling in?
quite honestly, it's a very, very hard life. And the reason I'm no longer a chef is because, I'd sweat. I got rid of a lot of sweat over the 12 years that I did it. And when you cook at a fairly high... I'm trained at a Michelin 2-star hotel. And when you train at that level, it's quite stressful. I loved doing it when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, but there's no way I want to do it now because it turns you into a maniac, basically.
But you're still cooking at home?
I still cook at home. Yeah, no, I love cooking now that I'm cooking for people that I love.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the questions, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, 25-Hour Hotel. Thanks to Jayesh for putting it together. Bill's playing later at the Vinyl Souk after party at 11 o'clock.
Jayesh, 11 to 1, is that right? But you're playing before that, right?
Oh, I'm playing after you.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Right, the
There you
graveyard
go.
shift.
Even
I have to
better.
go home soon for a nap.
Okay, so me and him are playing later. Please come.
Yeah, absolutely. And please read this book and all Bill's other wonderful books. We have some of these here today. Thanks so much, Bill Brewster.
Pleasure.